one of the questions I like to start out with is, what brought you to Stanford as a physician scientist?
My background training was mostly in cardiac development. I trained at UCSF in Deepak Srivastava's lab. I was interested in a lot of things related to transcriptional regulations during development back then. And with the medical training, I feel like there's a good niche to study a lot of that in adult cardiovascular diseases. Certainly, the type of forward genetic study that was done in the mouse during development cannot be done in humans. But I think with the advent of these large genetic data, it allows us to have a chance to do something similar to a forward genetic screening and study human cardiovascular disease in that manner. What attracted me to Stanford was a fewfold. One, it has a really strong cardiovascular genetics department. It has access to a lot of the biobank and larger data sets, a bunch of people working on transcriptional regulation, including TQ, whose lab I eventually joined. Oh, sorry, that's the Tom Koterma's lab that I eventually joined. I wanted to pick up this new skill set, and I see that there is a lot of interesting opportunity, a lot of collaborators, and a lot of expertise here that can grow my scientific skill set and knowledge. And that really, and not to mention that it has excellent clinical training here on the internal medicine side, excellent training here on the cardiology side, and I think the combination of which is pretty hard to beat.
And you're one of our recent graduates of the Translational Investigator Program for physician scientists, especially those that want a short track. Why don't you talk a little bit about your experiences in that program?
It's been a pretty seamless process over the last, I guess now 6 years, and now going on 7, I suppose. So I like the fact that we can start identifying mentors early. I can start identifying data sets early. Certainly during the first few years, that's mostly clinical intensive training. The focus is on the clinical side, but at the same time, on lighter rotations, I get to sit down and meet with the different possible mentors, talk about different possible projects, and even start learning some of the bioinformatic tool that I wanted to learn. So I think the path is already really long, and any way to shorten that process and start picking out tools that you may need synergistically is always good. And what was really helpful for me, I think it started to help me identify what are areas where we could potentially collect additional either biobank data or genetic data on, which I think it's turned out to be very helpful. So later on, when I'm actually in the lab.
You landed in the lab of Dr. Tom Kotermas, who's also my mentor. Talked a little bit about your experience in that lab and how that's launched you and the mentorship that you've gotten.
Yeah, I mean, it's really been a fantastic environment. There is a long line of people who have gone through the physician scientist program throughout the program, not just in the Kotermas lab, and certainly in many of the other labs in the cardiology division and many other medicine divisions as well. So there's plenty of people who are 2 years, 3 years, 5 years ahead of me who can help me along the way. And there's a lot of institutional knowledge. We certainly have our data sets of the previous grants that people have applied that is very helpful. It's not only for some of the verbiage that you need to apply, but also just to see what NIH is looking for and what people are thinking about. And overall, there's just a lot of hidden things that are in this physician scientist track that are hurdles that everybody have jumped through along the way, and having that institutional knowledge is really helpful.
Yeah.
And in the sort of experience in the Kotermas lab has been great. I work with a lot with Rob, who is leaving us to go to UNC in fact in a few days. And we basically
talk to Rob Worker. I'll be talking to him a little later.
And since we share interesting, so it's the same subset of patients here and there. In fact, I took over his clinical panel when I first came here. That we have a lot of common interest on some of the patients that we see and some of the interesting questions that are clearly not answered. I think at the end, we all go on this track thinking that there are plenty of questions that we can answer from the patient side. And when you're on the ward, that's especially so, when you feel like there are so many unknowns still that we can still discover. And I think having a lot of people in the department who have that same mindset was very helpful.
Now, one of the things that's impressed us as a faculty about you is the fact that you don't just have a basic and translational career, you're also an excellent clinician. You've worked with...
yes, too kind.
Talk a little bit about your clinical training and maybe even especially the outpatient clinical setting that you were part of with Dr. Watelis.
Yeah, so I was fortunate to spend the last 4 years with Dr. Vitalis is my main clinic mentor, and over the years have built out a very interesting clinic with I think a subset of patient that's very well suited for a physician scientist. So his clinic focused mostly on cardio oncology as well as cardiac amyloidosis. Now, both of these may be a small niche for many of the general cardiologists out there, but for somebody who's interested in the mechanisms and who's interested in discovery, it's just an area that's right for new findings and new studies. I initially joined his clinic mostly because I feel like with the onset of a lot of targeted therapies and all the side effects, we ought to find new biologies. Going back to the same idea about doing screenings, this is sort of a pseudo pharmacological screen in people, and we're using the entire cancer data set to see if there are any particular pathway inhibitors that are not having surprising effect on the cardiovascular system. And some of which have been helpful. Certainly the field is moving pretty fast on this, and one of our colleagues who is working on some of the Han Zhu, who's working on the checkpoint inhibitor cardiomyopathy on the patients we've seen. Sorry, I digress a little, but I just think that there's the training is excellent. There's a lot of very interesting patients, and it really sort of give me the idea that, man, there are so many good questions out there that we can go after. And it's amazing to see how busy Dr. Vitalis' clinic is, and to see that no one is studying any of these patients. It really is just quite the gold mine.
You know, one of the things that has happened is the world has been upturned by COVID. But our fellows have really stepped into the breach, and I think you and Han recently published a review article, on COVID. Talk a little bit about that and how you took the skills that you learned previously to turn quickly and pivot in that way.
And I'll say this sort of speaks for the mentorship environment. I think a lot of this I have to give credit to Dr. Cheng who came across an opportunity where they needed people to write sort of a basic science point of view on some of the questions that remain to be answered about COVID. And he very graciously passed on the opportunity to Han and I. So we were able to sort of, as a group, along with Dr. Vitalis, along with and Dr. Wu, and certainly Dr. Quatermas, as well as some people in our immunology department, sit down and go over some of the data that are available, however many there may be, and talk about what are the possible sort of mechanisms and sorts of possible questions that are still out there. And really, it was kind of a fun. It's kind of a fun exercise per se, because we know we certainly have seen plenty of myocarditis and other things in our general cardiology training. And with all these evidence of maybe possibly increased risk of arrhythmia, maybe possibly increased risk of myocarditis, it's fun to look at it sort of critically from the clinical side, having all these clinical experts, and then look at it on a basic science side. We pulled up single cell data that are unpublished on the different part of myocardium and different part of the vasculature to critically evaluate, well, how likely is it that these cells are actually attacking the myocardium and things like that. And it just overall it's a fun opportunity, to say the very least.
Yeah.
And a publication is a nice kick, but really it's just a fun opportunity.
You have a young child. We both had young children during that tail end of our fellowship. Talk a little bit about how you've been able to do balance work and life and science and clinical medicine.
So I have a son who's now 15 months old. He is just starting to walk around. So I'm sure life will get even busier as it is. So there's actually a good number of my co-fellows and also fellows above and a few years above and below me who have kids during their fellowship and during their training. It does seem pretty common here. The program is certainly very supportive. There are many childcare options. So my wife is also a physician as well. So we have our son at the daycare at the Palo Alto VA, which actually give fellows and residents the same priority as faculty, as I found out, which is quite nice. And Stanford has many daycare options as well. And in terms of hours wise, I think that the only time that's really will be quite difficult to have a kid probably was the first year of cardiology fellowship, because you are on a lot of night call, though that might sync up with waking up at night anyway. But beyond that, I think my co-fellows have been excellent. If there's anything that need coverage on People are very eager to step in. I think one day, after the vaccine, Dylan developed a fever at daycare and had to pick up Dylan quickly. And then actually one of my co-fellow, Dr. Mamich, ended up watching Dylan for a few hours while I finished clinic. So there's just a lot of collegiality here, and there's a lot of support among the fellows, and it's a very pleasant environment altogether.
Well, I've asked all the questions that I wanted to ask. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Come to Stanford, it's a fun place to be, and I'm sure the West Coast may be very different from those who are used to staying on the East Coast. For somebody like myself who has spent a little bit of time on the East Coast, I can tell you that it's different. But it's there's nothing wrong with having 50, 60 degree weather in the winter, and 70, 80 degree weather in the summer.
That's
you can go on the ocean and ski in the winter. It's not terrible.
The preceding program is copyrighted by the Board of Trustees of the Leland Stanford Junior University. Please visit us at med.stanford.edu.